Well, welcome to the 14th Annual Spooky Napa. My name is Rebecca Yerger, and I've been writing local ghost stories for a while now. And I am from here, so I've heard all sorts of stories throughout the years. How many are from Napa or the Napa area? Okay, all right. So you've heard your story, share stories as well, I'm assuming. Okay, well, I'm gonna get started. There might be some people that come in, and that's fine. And if you have a question at any point in time during the program, please raise your hand and I will take your questions and I will answer them to the best I can. Things about ghosts, that sort of thing, are not as tangible as far as getting an answer for you, but I will give it my best shot. Yes?
Can I record this with my phone? Voice recording, or are you putting it online?
It's going to be online.
It will be on the library's YouTube channel
Oh, okay.
in a few days.
Okay.
Tess, just so those who didn't hear it, it is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the library's YouTube account. Do you have an idea when?
Usually takes a few days. I
Okay.
would say by next week for sure.
Okay.
Check. And there's a link to it from our website. If you go to our past events, it'll take you to the YouTube.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before I get started? Okay, I'm going to start at the top of the valley and start in Calistoga and work our way down, although I might take a little detour here and there. So we'll see how it goes, see where the spirits lead us. How's fun. The first story is about two tormenting tabbies. I'll try not to pop my teeth too much with this. Anyway, this takes place in a very quiet neighborhood in Calistoga. And the neighbors have no recollection of these two tabbies ever existing in the neighborhood before they materialized about 5 years ago. And they are paranormal and they're rather predacious. They love to hunt and attack. And you'll understand, or you get an example of what they're talking about. Anyway, they arrive every spring and they leave in the fall, usually right after Halloween. They have a big showdown around Halloween time. Not exactly on the 31st, but close to it. Anyway, these two, as the neighbors call them, vicious entities, they've named them. One is Menace, and the other one is Mini Demon, or MD for short. Okay. And when visible, they kind of fade in and out according to whatever whim they might be in, they being the cats. Menace is described as being large and sleek. She is a gray tabby with elegant markings, but her eyes are the most notable. They glow an eerie, icy blue, especially when she's about ready to pounce. And sometimes all you see are her eyes, these icy blue orbs staring at you, and you know you're in trouble if she's doing that. They've given one a female identity, which is a Menace, and then they've given MD a male identity. And I'll continue with the story. I haven't gotten a vet in there to check, so we'll just have to take the neighbor's point of view on this. Anyway, she loves to stalk. She is quite the hunter. And in the living years of her life, she must have been a very good, very wonderful, productive, successful predator. She loves the thrill of the chase and the kill. Anyway, she now loves to frighten animals and people, especially children. But she does attack adults as well. She lays in wait, and you don't know that she's there because she'll go invisible. You might hear like a snap of a twig or a crush of a dry leaf, but that could be anything. But as I said, you're in trouble when you see her icy blue eyes looking at you. It's just like, oh, too late. And then she pounces. People have said that they felt an icy brush of her fur against their face. It's like she is swatting at them. And some have said that they've been scratched by her. And these scratches are very painful. They're oddly cold, and they take a long time to heal. But adults are easy target or easy prey. She likes to go after children and living pets. She will, if children are out playing around, she'll jump up on them, and she won't really bite the children, but she'll torment them and scare them. And then, but the animals, like other cats, they chase them away. But larger dogs, she'll jump up on their back and start biting them, that sort of thing. And it scares the poor animal, obviously. And one thing she does do to cats is that she'll kind of hit them broadside, roll them over on their back, and it almost seems like she's going to go for their throat. And then she disappears. But the poor animals are traumatized, as I said. And while she is having fun attacking, the other paranormal cat, MD for short, as I said, mini demon, he is keeping his eyes on Menace, because these two cats are mortal, or now immortal, enemies. And he's waiting for the perfect moment when she's vulnerable, and then he attacks her. And they have these mini skirmishes where you hear these unearthly yowls. You know how cats have those yowls, especially when they're fighting. Well, it's because they're not living anymore. They are rather unearthly in sounding and rather terrifying. They hear them at night, they being the neighbors, and they say it keeps them awake for hours because it's just, it causes a lot of jitters to the nerves. Anyway, as I said, these fights escalate, and their last fight, it goes on for quite a while. And it's first there's the defensive yowling that cats do, and then there's the actual fighting. And they disappear during the fight. All you can hear are the hisses and the yowls and all that kind of thing. And then when they reappear, it's MD standing over Menace's lifeless body. And shortly thereafter, he collapses as well, and they disappear. And that's the end of their haunting for the season. So that is the two tormenting tabbies. And one neighbor was asked about this whole experience, and she said, I used to love the spring and summer and even the fall, but now I look forward to the winter. Yes.
You said it's a quiet neighborhood in Calistoga. Do you tell us the street name, or is that a secret?
Yes, they've asked me to keep that quiet. Well, you can always go up there and hang out there for an evening and hear, during the opportune time of year. And then, you can check it out for yourself. Anyway, yes.
Is it only at night that they do this?
Well, primarily, yeah. I mean, cats have a tendency to be more nocturnal as far as their fighting, so it's just keeping that habit. So anyway, does that answer your question? Good. Any other questions about the terrifying tabbies? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to stay in Calistoga for a moment, and I'm going to talk about a story called The Looking Glass and the Heiress. There was one longtime family. They were here for 5 generations. When finally there was a granddaughter or a daughter born into the family. And the great-grandparents 5 times removed, in anticipation of having their own daughter, had purchased a very special, what would be called a vanity set, which would be a mirror and a brush and comb. And it was silver plate. They were of modest means, but they wanted to give that as a gift to their daughter that they hoped they would have on her 16th birthday. Well, many generations passed before a daughter was finally born to the family. So it would be the great-granddaughter 5 times greats. Anyway, she was told about this, that she was going to receive on her 16th birthday a wonderful treasure, family treasure. And on her 16th birthday, and she was so excited, she could barely wait. And finally, on her 16th birthday, she could hardly contain herself because she was so excited. And so she was given the package that was nicely wrapped. And she just ripped into the wrapping, and she opened this beautiful box, and it was the vanity set. And she just became very upset. It's just like, all this for just a stupid silver-plated vanity set? And she went off pouting and just stuck up in a closet. And obviously her family was a little upset with her. Anyway, a few days later, about a week later, she heard this odd noise coming from her closet. It's like a jingling noise. So she went to the closet, opened it, and she could hear the sound was coming from the box. So she took down the box and she opened it up, and in the mirror there was like a swirling fog. And in that fog appeared her great-grandmother 5 times. And her great-grandmother scolded the 16-year-old for being so unappreciative of such a wonderful gift. And they went on and talked for many hours. And the great-grandmother told her great-granddaughter all these wonderful family stories and gave her great advice as far as, how to live a good life, that sort of thing, and be a good person. And, she became, the 16-year-old began to appreciate how special this gift was. And, she kept it with her. 20 years passed, and she finally had her own daughter. And she was anticipating giving it to her daughter. And she was not really wanting to give up the mirror because it was so special in the fact that she was able to cross the veils, as they call it, between the worlds and speak to her ancestors and find out all sorts of things, because they told her about where she could find stories, where she could find artifacts, where she could find missing this and that belonged to the family. So over those 20 years, she started to accumulate all these family treasures. But what she discovered was the most prized treasure and possession was the fact, as I said, that she was able to speak to her ancestors many times removed. So that's the story of the looking glass and the heiress. Any questions so far? No? Okay. You're still awake. That's good. We only lost 4 people. Another walked in, so we have Thank you. I'm going to stay in Calistoga for a little bit longer. There was at one time a tea house. That was, I'm not sure what's in it now, the building, but it was operated for maybe about 5-7 years by a woman that was from England. And she started to become rather perturbed with this one woman who was always in the same seat, having just one cup of tea, and she would just continue to sip ever so ladylike on that tea. And she'd be there for hours. And the business owner just thought, okay, I'm glad she's there. She's a lovely lady. She doesn't disturb anybody, but she's monopolizing one table for hours on end. And the older woman appeared again, and the business owner had a surprise. In walked through the wall was a, you might say, a maid with a silver service and a cup of tea on it. And it was obviously tea from another realm. But the business owner was still perturbed that that table was being dominated for hours on end. So she went up to the older woman and said, you need to, leave. And the older woman said that she would once she finished her tea. So many hours later, she departed with her lady in waiting, I'll just call her that, following right behind her. And they both walked right through the walls to make their exit and to make their point that they were supernatural guests in this lovely establishment. So that is the house, the tea house of Calistoga. So these stories are very brief, there's minimal detail. Some of them are more elaborate, and I'll be getting to those in a little bit. Has anyone ever had an experience with the lady at the tea house in Calistoga?
I've had either, I never knew anything about that.
Well, she would sit at the back table, and I do believe it was near a window, close to the kitchen, and her lady in waiting would go from the kitchen, and she wouldn't go through bother with the door, she would just walk through the walls. So anyway, it was an interesting story. And I'm sure the business owner was a little stunned by the fact that these people were able to walk through the walls. That would be kind of an interesting experience. Has anyone had, just out of curiosity?
Did they continue coming back then after she
Yep.
told them to go?
Yes. Essentially, as the older woman said, she would come here to enjoy her tea. And she had a definite British accent, yeah.
Did anyone else see the lady besides the owner?
Well, once the owner started talking to some of the staff, no one wanted to say anything because oftentimes people think that they'll be judged and considered crazy if you talk about, oh yeah, I just saw someone walk through the walls. So no one said anything. But once the business owner broached the subject with her employees, they were all saying, yes, we noticed.
Are these recent sightings?
The business closed probably about 10 years ago or so. So it's been a little while. But this was an active visitation while the tea house was in operation. Any other questions? And I'm sorry it's closed. Otherwise, I'd say you'll go have a cup of tea. It may not calm your nerves if you see the older woman, the lovely lady. Any other questions? Okay, I will move on. Now, this is kind of a funny story. This is actually in St. Helena, and I just titled it "The Clumsy Old Winemaker." And this is a beautifully maintained Victorian in St. Helena, and just north of downtown. And there's a disembodied occupant that visits 3 to 4 times a year in this house. Frequently, it amuses his appearances or his visitations, amuse the inhabitants, the mortals that live in the house. Because he's constantly bumbling and fumbling, and they call him the winemaker because when he is present, as I said, you can't see him, but there's a distinct scent, if you will, of someone that works in a wine cellar. You know, someone that I think most of us are familiar with that scent, and it permeates the house when he is there. Anyway, and they call him clumsy because he frequently bumps into things, trips over furniture, knocks things over, and accompany these sounds of furniture being knocked around or whatever. You hear a male voice grumbling in great frustration. And he also goes into the kitchen, and it seems that's where he's making himself a meal. And they say you can actually, like in the morning, you can smell the bacon cooking when no one else is in the kitchen. And from the sounds, it sounds like the whole kitchen is just completely destroyed with all this bumbling, dropping things and all that. And when you go in, when the mortal's going in, you know, they're going, oh, this is going to be terrible. They open the door because it has one of the old doors like Victorians had between the kitchen and the dining room. And it looks like, and rightfully so, it looks like nobody has been in there. Well, there's no human that has been in that kitchen. But it's kind of interesting. I talked about how I have had the opportunity to experience the clumsy winemaker. And when he's busy doing whatever, especially when he's in the kitchen, he has some favorite phrases. Dag nabbit, frickles, blast it all. So that's, you hear that constantly, and it's grumble, 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 grumble. And according to, like I said, the mortal occupants, nothing is ever disturbed or destroyed. It's like, who knows, that he might have been an occupant in that house when he was living. And he's come back maybe during harvest. There doesn't seem to be a specific time. He does come back, as I said, 3 to 4 times a year. With not, it doesn't really correlate with any particular holiday or anything like that. But he does spend more time during harvest season. So that adds to his moniker of the clumsy old winemaker. And I have a quote from the one of the occupants. It said, "It's hard not to laugh at the old guy. He makes a lot of ruckus. It's the harder he tries, the worse it gets. You feel sorry for the old guy. It's actually hilarious. It's like listening to those old slapstick style radio programs." So it kind of gives you an idea of what they experience when the clumsy old winemaker is visiting their home. That clumsy old winemaker.
Has anybody gone into the history of the house and see if they could find out who he was?
No. They try to do, a chain of title and to see who had owned the house before, further back than other original title search. And they didn't really run across anything that was related to someone. It could have been that he was a guest. Maybe he came in during certain times of the year, and he was either a family member of a property owner or a friend. I don't know. There's some of these things you just have to accept it as it is, and the fact that we won't know all the details. We are talking about the paranormal. We are talking about ghosts, so we don't always have the details on those things. If I do discover it, I'll let you know. Okay?
Put it in your phone.
Oh, thank you. I will do my best. The next one is moving down to Rutherford, and it's an old farmhouse in the Rutherford area, and I've called this Angry Voices. And a woman who grew up in that house talked about, she came from a large family. There are about 12 kids in that family. So it was a very packed house. And with a lot of bodies running around the house, there's really no silence or time to hear anything else that's going on in the house. Well, as the older siblings started to leave the house, grow up and move out, the younger siblings started to notice that they weren't alone. And there was one bedroom in particular where there were these voices. And as the conversation continued, they would get angrier to the point that they would start fighting. And as the living woman's mother got older, and they brought in caretakers, live-in caretakers, the caretakers refused to sleep in that bedroom. I can't imagine why. And so, there would be this bickering, but the voices, even though it was clear that you could hear that there were voices, there were either 2 or 3, you couldn't discern what they were saying, what they might be arguing about, and you could not tell their gender. So it was just a sound of human voices arguing. And like I said, it's a brief story, but I think that's scary enough. Anyway, we're going to continue down valley. And this one is actually in Napa. This takes place in Napa, not too far from where we are. And I titled it The Delightful Young Miss. She is described as a beautiful young lady, a child, that lives in a beautiful 2-story Victorian that has lovely landscaping in front. And as I said, it's in Napa's Old Town neighborhood. And there is a couple that lives in the house. There are no other occupants other than the occasional guest, except for the delightful young miss. And this is her description of how the couple have described her. And she is, they definitely know she's a ghost. She is semi-transparent, but it's full body, a full apparition. That you can usually see at least some of what's behind her. So, supposedly some apparitions are so dense in their ectoplasm that you don't know that they're an entity until it might be too late. But anyway, she is described as being petite, wearing a white drop waist dress with puffy short sleeves. She has auburn hair and blue eyes. She also has white stocking and white button-up ankle-high boots. So more than likely, she occupied that house when it was fairly new, based on that type of apparel for a child and the age of that house. Anyway, she's been seen, and she continues to be seen in numerous places in the house and also outside. She has her room that she goes up to that probably was her bedroom when she was alive. And she plays with toys, and she's even been seen napping on the bed. And then she goes outside and plays. She's swinging on a tire swing that is suspended from a branch of a big tree that's in the backyard. But the swing is no human can swing on the swing, let's just put it that way. It is probably a remnant from her life, and it only is visible when she's playing on it. And she skips and she plays and hums and plays with her dolly. She always has her China doll with her. And then she continues to play, but when she ventures out, tries to go out in front, she disappears, especially when she gets to the area right in front of the porch of the house. Anyway, she's a delight to have in the house. And there are occasions when she gets to be a pouty little one. And at certain times, like around bedtime, she's having a conversation with her parents, not the mortals that live in the house, but her parents in her living days. And she says, but Daddy, no, stomp, 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 goes upstairs. So it must have been, she was told to go upstairs for the bed. And then there's other interactions. She does not really interact with the humans. They all are aware of one another, but she doesn't try to communicate with the human beings. But unfortunately, there's one day every year that is when she's not a delightful young miss. Around, I don't know, late morning, you hear a bunch of ruckus up in the attic. And, you don't know what it is, things are crashing, and it sounds like a window is being broken. You hear a scream, and you hear a scream as if it's dropping from a higher floor to a lower floor, and then all of a sudden it stops. And then she reappears in front of the mortals, holding her baby doll that's damaged from the fall. And she's all disheveled. She's always pristine when you see her, except for this day. And then when she holds out her dolly, she looks at it, puts her head down, and then she disappears. And she reappears the next day like nothing happened. Well, the current homeowners were getting a little distressed about this, so they started talking with their neighbors. Some of the neighbors live in the house. They're like multiple generations of owners of this, their family has owned the property since the house was built. So they started talking with some of these individuals. And they said that what happened, what they heard through oral history, is that this young couple had this little girl. And one day in the spring, when the dad was upstairs cleaning out the attic, the little girl went up to spend some time with her daddy. And she tripped over something and fell through the window and then fell to her death. in the lawn in front of the front porch. That's why she disappears every time she tries to go out in front. And the couple, her parents, were so devastated by the loss of their little girl that they sold the house and moved. And there's been a succession of owners until the current couple purchased it, rehabilitated the house, and have lived there ever since. They've owned the house about 30, 40 years. So they've been a longtime resident in the house, and they've had the company of the delightful young miss for that long as well. So that's the story of the delightful young miss. Any questions or comments?
Again, did they trace back who may have owned the house, or is it just oral history only?
Well, they did a chain of title, they know, but they won't say who it is.
Oh, so they did find.
Yeah.
A girl that died. there.
Yes, and they did not elaborate on the date of her death, when it would have been in the paper, that sort of thing. So I would have to do a lot of digging in the old newspapers to try to
Wonder why
find it.
you felt the need to protect that information.
Well, I think partly to protect their privacy, because there are a lot of people who are very fascinated by these stories. So they don't think anything of knocking on a door of a private residence and saying, oh, I heard all about this. I want to come see your house, or they go into the backyard or whatever. So they feel very protective over the little girl. Yeah, because they themselves are childless. So they feel like she's kind of theirs in a way. Any other questions? No? Okay. And just so you know, yes, I've seen her. And she is she's like a doll herself. So, and I'm glad they protect her. So, any other questions? No? Okay. Well, we're going to go from something kind of sweet and sad, tragic, and then to something that's a little unnerving. I call it the bewitched basketball. This takes place in a house that was built like in the 1970s. So it doesn't have to be an old house to be haunted. This woman that told me the story, she had 3 sons, and they had a basketball hoop out front, like a lot of people do, right by the driveway, that sort of thing. And they would, have fun playing basketball with themselves and also with neighborhood friends. And there were house rules that they had to be inside at a certain time of the evening, because they had either the chores to do or they had homework or whatever. And also she just didn't want them outside until all hours, because hearing the basketball go and hitting the chain of the hoop or the backboard can be rather annoying to someone who's trying to sleep next door. So, they had to stop. So one evening she heard just the sounds I was talking about. The basketball bouncing, and then the swoosh, and then the chains of the basket, and then you almost hear this person running. You know how feet sound on asphalt with tennis shoes, and then you could hear the ball dribbling again. And she said, "Okay, they're supposed to be inside by now, and they're breaking a house rule. This is not okay." So she rushed outside. There wasn't anyone there. There wasn't even a ball to be found. So she was in a short distance from the kitchen to where the basketball hoop was. And this kept happening for years. And she didn't want to say anything to her sons. And then gradually her sons, as they do, as we all have done, would grow up, we move out and get on with our lives. Well, her sons had come home for a family celebration, and it was getting late. It was in the evening. Guess what they heard? A basketball. And they also heard the swoosh and a dunk of a basket being made. And that continued, and they all kind of were looking at each other because there was no basketball hoop out in front of the house. That was gone. Because like, as I said, the sons had all grown up and had moved out and were living their own lives. So the mom kind of looked at all the sons and they all kind of looked at each other and they had a nice long chat about how they were all aware of the bewitched basketball for many, many years, but no one said anything. And she said, it was a relief to have that conversation. She said, but it's kind of creepy. So that's the story of the bewitched basketball. And that's here in Napa. And she's still in that house. And she said you can still hear him from time to time. I am going to repeat a couple of stories that were from last year. The Looking Glass was one of them. And this next one is as well. We were interrupted last year and I wasn't able to tell all the stories. We did re-record and it was uploaded to YouTube, but some of you might not have had an opportunity to listen or view that. And I don't think it was archived, was it, Tess?
It's still on there.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
It was the 13th annual. Anyway, it was all by Zoom. Well, this is called the Eternal Fan. And it takes place at Tulaque Cemetery, which of course is in Napa. And it is a dense, full human form, early 20s, and a white male. And he's dressed in 1950s attire, just like James Dean. And he has, you know, the blue jeans, white t-shirt, rolled up short sleeve, cigarette pack, and the sleeves, and dark glasses that are pulled and set lower, looking over them, and things like that. You know, classic James Dean. Anyway, he stands or leans up against the wall by the niches in the crypt area at Tulaque Cemetery. They're the more modern structures. There's just a series of crypts where you can put in the coffin, or there's the little niches. It's an exterior setting. Anyway, you know, he just kind of hangs out there and he acts really cool, like James Dean. And he also likes to be a bad boy or emulate a bad boy, just like James Dean was in his movies. He starts talking to any mortals that come up and about James Dean. And the mortals realize the fan is not of the living when they finally figure this out. He starts to become more transparent. And a fan soon realizes that the truth about his living status, has been revealed. So then he pushes up his dark glasses, snaps both his right and left fingers, and then at that point he's really stunned the mortals. And he laughs and says, "See, I'm just as much of a bad boy as my best bud, James Dean." So that's the Eternal Fan at Tulaque Cemetery. And it would have to be during the daytime because the cemetery is closed at night. So you never know who you might be talking to at Tulaque Cemetery. Just saying. Anyway, this is a fun story. I like to add some humorous ones on occasion. And this is the Ghost in Denial. And he inhabits a house in Napa that was built in the 1970s, 1980s. Once again, there must have been something about that era. Dazed and confused, I guess, as the movie goes. Little is known about his life when he was a living being. He started visiting this house when the current owners were a young couple and had 2 young children. And so it was the classic family of 4, mom, dad, daughter, and son. And at first, the children were the ones that discovered that they had an extra member in the household, besides the humans and the pets. They were up in the one room that was kind of like their playroom. And they would come up and they started talking to this entity. And he started getting really annoyed, like, go away, I'm busy, I'm working, go away. And they said, well, why are you here? Why are you a ghost? And he goes, what? And he said, I'm not a ghost. And then there's a mirror close in that room. And they said, well, look in the mirror. And, you know, I'm kind of condensing the event. And he says, no, I am not a ghost. I'm not a ghost. I'm dead. I can't be dead. And he said, everybody left me. Who could have done this to me? I don't remember dying. And he gets really frantic. He's running around, knocking everything over. The cat and dog that are in the room are just freaking out. The parents are downstairs. They come charging up. They come into the room and see all of this pandemonium going on, this craziness. And they see the ghost as well. And they kind of stop in the tracks. And, you know, because they're stunned, because it's not the kids acting up or the, you know, pets. It is a ghost. And so the parents slowly get to their children and back the children out of the room. And while the ghost is having a meltdown, because he now knows he's a ghost, but he refuses to accept the fact that he's a ghost. So they have dinner, and guess who shows up? The ghost. And the ghost gets very frustrated with the fact that he can't hold a knife and a fork, that he can't eat anything. He says, I'm starving. He says, I want some food. And then he gets really frustrated. Well, this was going on. Scenes like this were happening while the children were growing up. And as the children got older and they went on with their lives, it seemed like the ghost had disappeared. And they say that children have a certain energy and an openness that attracts spirits, not necessarily negative, but any ghostly entity. And because they're just so open, you know, they haven't drawn conclusions yet. So anyway, one evening, not long ago, the husband and wife were sitting down at the dining table, and up comes the ghost. So how are you? What's for dinner? Did you miss me much? And I spoke to the husband about this, and he said, we were quietly freaking out, because he had returned. And they said, but we were relieved to know that he finally accepted the fact that he was a ghost. Because one of his last things he said, the ghost said, I hate this ghostly stuff. I could just die for a good steak. So, you know, it sounds like he was maybe a comedian at one time. But it's a great story, and you know, it's true. These are very level-headed people that have told me these stories, these accounts of what they've experienced in the paranormal realm. Anyway, I'm going to continue on, and the last 4 stories are from within the hill area. So you might say the spirited hills of Napa County. This first story is a very sentimental story, and I call it The Long Road Home. And I did tell this last year. It was in the late 1800s, and it was along one of the many side roads meandering East Napa County hills, you know, where the neighbors lived miles apart from one another. You have to remember this is the 1800s, so it was even greater distance. But, you know, of course, they would all band together when they were in need, and also just for celebrations, because it was too long of a drive to go into Calistoga, St. Helena, Napa, whatever, for, let's say, a holiday celebration like the 4th of July. So they would have these neighborhood celebrations. Well, there was one person that never showed up. They did show up to celebrate their harvest in a Halloween party at one of the farms. And he was known as the Old Hermit of the Hill. And everybody was stunned that he showed up at this party. And he was dressed in his Sunday best, and he had gifts for everyone. He was smiling and laughing. And it was a great departure from his norm because he's usually surly and didn't bathe very often. And so you would want to take a step back. And when he was asked what would change, what caused this change, he said, I realized I've missed out on so much of life's good moments. It's a shame, and I am ashamed, because you never know when you'll get the call to go back home. And he pointed upward as he was saying, going home. Everybody had a great time. And he was kind of like the center of attention. He was the ghost in denial. He was the comic and the funny guy and very endearing. And everyone was so pleased to finally get to know the old hermit on the hill. And, he made sure he wished everyone well when he was about ready to go back home. And, but he was reluctant to climb into his wagon because he was having such a wonderful time. It was time to go home because the party was wrapping up. The next morning, the neighbor found the old hermit slumped in his wagon across from his prized vineyard and halfway home. At the funeral and wake, there was a big party in his honor and remarks about how pleasant he was. And it was too bad that he couldn't have done this sooner, but they're glad he finally did. Shortly thereafter, the hermit started paying visits to his neighbors. And like usual, he was kind of grumpy, but kinder than he used to be. He would complain about the weather. Sometimes he said, how are you? Do you need help? And eventually the kinder part of him was the usual that people would experience. And, something needed fixing, he'd show up and try to help or repair the problem or advise. Then he would smile and vanish after he had finished his task. Or he would keep watch over everyone at a distance. And he had a knack of materializing just when someone needed someone to talk to. So he was kind of like a guardian of his neighbors. And then when asked why he was still here, the hermit replied, because I have yet to fulfill and finish my work and enjoy all my neighbors. This is my long road home. So that's one story. There's some very sentimental stories. Now we're going to go to another extreme. The menacing highwayman. How many are familiar with the road that goes from Berryessa to Knoxville in East Napa County? Yeah, it's a lonely road. There are places where it's just one lane, and there are no streetlights. It's very rural, and you can get kind of creeped out, even just on normal circumstances. Since the early 1800s, this remote road in East Napa County has proven to be heart-stopping for some locals. They'll be driving along, navigating this lonely road. And by the way, this haunting has only been experienced by a few people. But anyway, they have said that this ghostly highwayman is astride his horse that suddenly appears directly in front of their vehicle. So of course they just slam on the brakes because their headlights hit this figure. They don't know that it's not human. And they describe this as he's a full apparition. You can see him from head to toe. He's wearing like Levi's, and he's wearing a road coat, the dust coats that they used to wear. And it's so tattered, it almost looks like spider webs. And he has a Stetson, and he also has a rifle and a sidearm. His horse is this beautiful stallion, and that is white, not black, and is very restless. And you can actually hear as the horse is moving and as he's moving, you can hear the jingle of the reins, And you can hear, you know how leather makes that creaking noise, like saddles? You can hear that. But you don't notice their full features until the highwayman raises his head. He has black orbs for eyes. And when he was, originally on the road, when he was living, it must have been a cold winter night or a cold night, because you can see steam coming out of the horse's nostrils. And when it seems like he's talking or breathing, you can see the vapor from his mouth or nose. And and it also seems like there's a wind blowing at that time. Anyway, he says, give me all your money, give me all your valuables. And the humans sitting in the vehicles are going, yeah, they're a little stunned. I think I would be. And the mortals are not acting fast enough. So he raises his rifle and the horse rears. He pulls the trigger. You hear the sound of, a bullet being fired, and then he vanishes. And he's laughing the whole time, and the horse is making, the noises that horses usually make. And the people that have experienced this, they have to sit there for a little while to collect themselves. And others said, I don't care, I'm getting out of here. And they turn around and go back to a place where they know they're human beings. So that is the story of the menacing highwayman. Has anyone ever experienced something like that? Okay. Thankfully, I have not. Anyway, the next one, and I thought this was appropriate. I have talked about this property before, but it's been recently sold and was purchased by RH. It is the Napa Soda Springs Resort up above Silverado Trail off of Soda Springs Road. It was completed in 1881. To give you a little bit of background, it was once a splendid and sprawling resort for the wealthy. And it was the, sometimes called the Folly, but it was the brainchild of Colonel Jackson, J.P. Jackson. And it has natural springs on the property, and they have various names, including Lemon Springs, because the water tastes like lemon coming out of the spring. And they had fancy structures around them. One of them had a pagoda around it, so that was called Pagoda Springs, rightfully so. And some of the spring water was bottled right there on premise and was sold for its healing properties throughout the Bay Area. Not only here in Napa County or the North Bay, it was shipped to Oakland and San Francisco and points in between. Anyway, as far as the unexplained and ghostly experiences, on the resort grounds, there are sounds, all sorts of sounds that can be heard. One of them is horse hooves and wagon wheels, and moving across the cobbled pavement or pavers of the property. And there are many avenues that wind through this property. Anyway, you can hear it kind of jingling and jangling along because there are bottles, like the wood cases of bottles that are in the wagon, and you're being cobblestone, it would be uneven, so it would be, you hear the jingle, jingle, jingle. And then you would hear them stop. And then you'd hear a distant male voice. And then you'd hear as if someone was carrying those lugs of bottles from the wagon to where it was probably like the bottling plant for the soda water. And then you would hear them leave. You know how you can tell it's moving away, the sound becomes more distant. The next mysterious sound are women's voices that drift around the resort. There's one place, it was kind of an anomaly when the living would go there. You would go up into an oak tree where they had this beautiful seating area that was built into the oak tree. And when you were seated up there, you could hear anything that was going on the entire resort. You can hear private conversations. So they kind of warn people, be careful what you say. Not that people intentionally listened, but they could hear. So you would hear these women's voices, and the women do materialize at certain times, and they're dressed in Victorian or Edwardian style clothing. And it's a group of about 5 younger women, and they're having a grand old time, just being young women and having fun, on a stroll and just laughing and giggling, that sort of thing. And it seemed like at certain points that they're almost daring one another. And, like, go look over there, go past her so-and-so or whatever. And they go do that, and then they come running back and giggle, 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 that sort of thing. And then there's also, the mansion no longer exists as of a few years ago. It had survived previous fires, but the 2017 fire totaled it. Also claimed a descendant of the Jackson family. She was one of the first ones with the 2017 Atlas Peak fire. Anyway, when the house still stood and when the family still lived in the house, there was a woman that would, with her, like her maid, were scurrying around the house, and you could see the woman who was obviously the lady of the house, pointing out to the maid, do this, do this, do this. It almost seemed like they were getting ready for a visit of some important, person, and they were getting the house nice, neat, and tidy. And later you would see them up in the bedrooms, fluffing pillows and straightening frames and that sort of thing. And also she would walk through just a final inspection of the living room, like right before someone was supposed to show up. And the family said when you could see her facial features, she looked like Jackson's wife. So she would be the lady of the house. And, obviously her home is now gone. So, and I haven't heard of any sightings in the area, because sometimes even if the structure's gone, they can still inhabit the area. And I haven't heard of anything. And then there is another story, one more associated with this property. It is near the gates where you go in and take the drive up, the drive up to the resort. And you're driving along and you see this, and it's not the highwayman. You see a man astride a horse, and he's Stetson and the duster coat. He has a dog that's running alongside of him, and the horse is black, not white this time. And then you turn a corner when you should still be able to see them. They're gone. You look back, there's no one there. And then all of a sudden they'll reappear, like they pass behind something and they come out of, come back in view. And there have been many drivers that aren't so sure they want to continue up the road, but that's the story, one of the other stories with Napa Springs. Has anyone ever gone up to Napa Springs? Okay. Have you ever had any uneasy feelings there?
The historical society has something up there.
Okay.
No.
Probably too many people. Yeah. When there's larger groups of the living, either they're taking leave or you just can't hear them. You don't notice them because there's so many other people around. Anyway, so that's Napa Springs. As I said, I thought it was appropriate since the property just sold. And I have one last story. I'm running over a little bit. I apologize. This was requested, and it does take place in the Western Hills. It's the Reeboks. How many have heard the story of the Reeboks? Okay. It is a local suburban legend. I call it suburban since we're not an urban center. Anyway, there were many versions to this, but the one that I've heard is that They're like the flying monkeys of Wizard of Oz, excuse me. And, but they're bigger. Instead of monkeys, they're like gorillas. They're half gorilla, half human. They're winged, large wings in the back, large, long fangs and claws. And they're rather gruesome. No one knows the origin of this story or the name Rebob. It's kind of an unusual name. Someone said it might be an amalgamation of their first two victims. So, like what they're doing with celebrities these days. Anyway, at the end of Partridge Road, it was considered a lover's rendezvous. Some speculate that it was the parents that were trying to dissuade their teenage kids from going up there and maybe making them grandparents too soon. I don't know. Anyway, there was, some parental control, I guess. And then also at that time, 50s and 60s, there were all the movies like The Swamp Thing. And just think of all those different types of movies that you'd see in the matinee or wherever. So it was kind of that same era. But I have not found or spoken to anyone who said, I'm guilty, I'm the one that did it. But, or said, oh yeah, it started as a prank or whatever. But also at the end of Partridge Road is the Partridge family private cemetery. And I will get to that in a moment. But the story goes that a young couple would drive up to the Partridge Point and just to have some privacy. And the story also goes that the Rebobs would be laying in wait because they desired the flesh and blood of young, impassioned adults. So when the couple were blissfully ignorant and just enraptured in their company, the Rebobs would open the car with their claws like tin cans and consume the young couple. And the next day, or a few days later, there'd be stories at the school going, oh, did you hear about Bobby and Susie? They went up to Partridge Point and they haven't come back. And some, would say, oh, well, no big deal. It's just a story. We'll go up. And supposedly they would see remnants of the attack. The car in shreds, remnants of clothing, whatever else. And then in later years, it became a prank. The story would be told. And usually the older classmen would be telling the younger classmen. It was almost like a rite of passage. And we kind of dare them. And then a few of the older kids would say, I'm sorry, I can't go because, whatever, a valid reason. And then they would go up in advance and set up the unknown, the blissfully ignorant underclassmen. So the younger classmen, always seated in the middle of the vehicle, they'd be hearing about all sorts of tales as they were driving up Partridge Road. And then they would park. And one thing that the ones that had gone up before, what they did, they were laying in wait in the shrubbery, that sort of thing. And are you familiar with the gardening tool that looks like a claw? They'd have that. They have gorilla masks and all sorts of things. And I feel sorry for the one who was driving the car because I'm sure mom and dad did not appreciate down the side of the park. And but they say that many of the ones that were set up, they would pass out. They would have bodily issues, and which they would not live down for the rest of their high school career. And some of them would just take off down the road. There was the fight or flight, so they would, down the road, and some of them would have to go after them to make sure that they didn't get hurt. And in later years, others would just go up, and there'd be numerous cars up there. And that road at one point in time was not a very worthy road. It had a lot of ruts and bumps and that sort of thing. And there were many axles that were broken coming down the road. So that is the story of the rebobs and the consequences of suburban legends. Anyway, that concludes my presentation. Been an hour, believe it or not, a little bit over. Are there any questions or comments or stories you'd like to share?
You can't get to the other part of the road anymore.
No. And the cemetery is supposedly haunted too. They say if you walk in there, it squishes under your feet, and there's an old caretaker that will chase you and raise a shotgun, and then he disappears. So, it might persuade you to leave. So yes, it's all fenced off now. And it's a better road now. There's more houses in that area. There's more lights. So it's not quite the same as 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So we can remember when. Anyway, any questions or comments? No? Tess, is there anything from the?
Someone had asked while you were speaking about this last story, isn't there a cemetery up there?
Yes, there.
And you answered that
Yeah.
question, so.
Okay. Now, there are, as I said, the counts are that, they'd be exploring and their feet would sink into the ground. Especially when the caretaker would appear.
Mm.
They said you couldn't move. And you'd have this being, entity chasing you. So, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, are there any other little private cemeteries? I mean, I know Yountville and all those, but that one is a private one, obviously, on Parker Road. Is there some others around
Well,
Napa County?
Oh, yeah, there's at what people say is Bothay Park. There's that's one of the original cemeteries where the really early pioneers, because there was a church there. So there's cemeteries there, or burials there. There are a lot of, I'm trying to remember, I think there are 23 different cemeteries in Napa County. Many of them are private and they're on private property, but the descendants have right to use those spaces. So, and there are quite a few. There were two women in the Napa Valley Genealogical Society that researched all these cemeteries, documented them, and have photographs. Those two women, I don't know if they're still with us or not. That was quite a few years ago, but I'm sure the Genealogical Society still has that. It was a big binder. It was really interesting. I didn't know that there were that many, but about 24 throughout the county. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
There's another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Is that where you mostly get your research for your work?
I mean, a genealogical society? Well, as far as this is concerned, the ghost stories, I've heard about some of these stories, or when I started writing the column Memory Lane 27 years ago, people started sending in first by letter or calling me, and then eventually, emails about their experiences. And from the first fall onward, I wrote a ghost story. And just so you know, whether you subscribe to the Register or not, this Sunday, there'll be another installment of ghost stories. And it'll be on the front page of the Register. And my editor said that I have to own this, so I guess I will. I'm going to be writing a ghost story book of local ghost stories. So hopefully by this time next year, I'll be dispirited by November 1st. Or thereabouts. But anyway, so be looking for it. You'll be hearing about it. And what we're talking about is the first volume of probably about 7. Because I have about 300 to 400 ghost stories. So, and they're all local, yes.
That was my question, if they were all local.
They're all local.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can keep you in there hereafter for quite some time. And I will be starting all these plans. I have to get ready for next year. I'll see what I can scare up. Any other questions? Is there anything else?
Yeah, so V in the chat wanted to know if the Napa Mill is haunted
Yes, it is.
or the Chablis Inn on Coombs Street.
Should we in on Coombs Street? Oh, is that the one across from the courthouse?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure of its name. It used to be Travel Lodge. On Coombs? Oh, is that the one at the very end of Coombs? Is it?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
she's singing.
Yeah.
By the bridge.
Yeah, okay.
That's the Napa Valley Register.
Oh,
Yeah. Could they clarify what,
The Chablis Inn is on, Trinket.
yeah, I think it's up by where Valergus used to be.
Solano,
Yeah.
Maybe they mean that one.
Possibly in at the end of Coombsville. I mean, at the end of Coombs Street, South Coombs. It used to be where all the little motel rooms were.
That's
Oh.
the Napa Valley Lodge.
I think that's called Chablis.
I think it is. Yeah, there's two of them there.
I could look it up. But so that you said the mill is haunted.
Yes, the Napa Mill Complex,
Mhm.
right over here. Yes. There's quite a bit of activity there.
the Fagiani building,
You don't want to go there.
but to eat maybe.
No, no,
Oh,
you don't want to go. I guarantee you, you don't want to be on the second floor.
Oh,
My former mother-in-law went in there after it had been closed for years, and I was just left closed and locked. She said she went in there with one of the owners, I think the sister. She said nothing had been touched in
Right,
30 years,
yeah, no.
frozen in time.
Well, Muriel wanted to leave things as they were, so hopefully the case will be solved, which it was. And what's on the second floor is the perpetrator of that murder. You don't want to be there.
So what was upstairs? Was it like storage rooms or what?
No, that was part of the restaurant. And it was actually where a lot of lodges met, that sort of thing. But you just don't want to go up there.
I've already been there.
We were okay.
No, I'm just telling you what people have told me. So, I don't talk about the Fajani building much because, Anita Andrews' daughters still are living with that along with their children. And they've requested that that not be publicized. So I'm trying to honor their wishes.
Okay, she's saying, sorry, it's Cedar Gables
Oh, Cedar Gable,
Yes.
yes,
haunted.
yeah. The, Cedar Gables, Churchill Manor. Trying to think some of the other homes all have spirits. So, yeah, there's a prankster in Cedar Gables.
Prankster.
I didn't know this person didn't say anything.
Well,
I'm not
be-
sensitive to that.
yeah, well, be grateful, I guess. Yes,
Have you heard that?
yeah,
Yes. Oh.
yeah. I prefer not to go to those because once you verbalize it, it's there. It's like Beetlejuice. Oh, she was talking about, do I know any demonic stories? Encounters, and I said yes. But I prefer not to discuss those because you evoke that by doing it. So anyway, sorry, but any other questions or comments? Yes.
I just wanted to share about the rebond. I had heard all about that when I grew up here, but I had never heard this version. In middle school, and high school, we would always say that, like in the 50s, there was some laboratory up there, and then we combined monkeys and bats. Like they do.
Well, I'm telling you, one of the original versions, it's morphed over time. And one of them also said monkeys and chickens that were combined.
Of course.
So. I mean, it is a legend, so it's kind of fun to see what people do with it. Yeah. So, any other questions or comments? Yes.
Where did you say we could, get in touch with some of your past, presentations here? You said it earlier in the talk.
Well, that last year's, the 2021,
Mhm.
that's still in the, it would be like the archive. Well, Tess, why don't you tell them?
It should still be on the Napa County Library YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and find our channel by searching Napa County Library, you should be able to find it. Or on our website, if you go to past events, it'll take you there as well.
All right. Did everyone hear that?
Great.
Good.
And the new one should be up within a few days. I said by next week, definitely.
Okay. So you can get back in the spirit of things. Anyway, any other questions or comments? We're gonna have to wrap here pretty
Yeah.
soon. The library closes the day.
The old county building out on Napa, Old Napa Road.
The old infirmary?
Yeah,
The old infirmary, yes.
and I used to work in the old building. If you were there alone, you heard things.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's,
They were children. It used to be in Brown. Yeah, that's what she said.
yeah, it was the old infirmary and, it was the hospital. And, there were a lot of, intense life experiences there and lives ended there. So yes, it is haunted. And so is the Napa State Hospital. That place is just overflowing with sightings about,
State Hospital.
yes, they do.
How could we find it?
In the book that's coming out.
I don't want to spoil a lot. Any other questions? Yes.
You have stories or know people that want to contribute stories, can they contact you to share?
Yes, yes, they can. I'm trying to think of the best way. Well, my email is pretty much public domain and the fact that it is attached to my column, so people can access it that way. Do you have pen and paper? Okay, your phone. Okay, let me spell my name and then I'll go, because that's important to get the email address correct. And please identify yourself as far as, you were at my presentation here. Okay, it is my name. First of all, my name is Rebecca, Rebecca. Last name Yerger, Yerger. Is it, ER, not EA? Okay, it is Yerger Enterprises, all one word. That's multiple. At yahoo.com. It's my business email. So. Thank you. And like I said, just identifying yourself, and otherwise I might think of it as not legitimate.
Yeah, I don't have stories, but I know people do definitely.
Okay, all right. And I'd be happy to talk with them and get their story, and it could be published. Or shared with the community at least. So anyway, anything else? Oh, great, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And that's cool. We have 15th annual, so we'll have to make a big party of it.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a spectacular Halloween.